Good evening, everybody. Welcome along. It is Inspire and Be Inspired, your weekly motivational conversation, occasional life hack thrown in. Tonight, we are talking to a young gentleman by the name of A.D.D. He's going to be telling us about his 17 years clean and sober, his journey of self-discovery, and how along the way he is learning to deal with A.D.D. I'll bring Ian onto the screen in a little while. Let me just address one or two people that are with us live. Please feel free to say hello. I will be doing my very best to address your comments, put any questions to Ian along the way during this conversation, and I'll also say the same to people who come back and check out the recording. Kicking off tonight, I want to say hi to Angela, hi to Mr. Partridge, shouts out to Mr. McCormack, and Damien Charles says, I am here, Ian. So again, as we progress, I will say hi to one or two of you. I could sit here rambling all evening, but I think the best thing for me to do is bring on my guest and say good evening, Mr. Dads. How are you, my friend?
I'm bearing up at the moment, thank you, Andy.
You're bearing up. Good. Well, thank you for giving me your time today. We need to just put into context what's going on for you at the moment when we get this underway, because we did have a conversation earlier that you may not have been able to join us. You're having a few issues with your mum at the moment. Do you just want to put that into context for us?
Yeah, and it'll be good to do that because I can also put a disclaimer out there as well, Andy. So my mum at the moment is incredibly unwell. She's in hospital. She's in heart failure, which means in turn means she's got bad circulation. That bad circulation in turn is limiting her mobility because of the fluid retention, because of the circulation. And in turn, Thursday she had a fall. Saturday she had a fall. Consequently, she's ended up in hospital. And Saturday it was looking touch and go whether she was coming to the end of her life. And at the moment she's bearing up. She's got a little colour back. She's a little confused and disorientated. So consequently, that's affecting me with the worry and the love for my mum. So if I lose train of thought at all, that'll be why. And I'm totally cool with all this. And even if something comes up that I need to share some emotion with you, Andy, and it means that I might shed a tear, I'm absolutely cool with that as well.
Okay, mate. Well, thank you very much. And we're getting lots of well wishes from the chat. Good evening, Angel. How are you, my love? Okay, so let's just get straight into this. As you know, anybody that may be joining us for the first time, I'm a DJ. Ian's a DJ. We've met through our love of music. And the whole point of these conversations is for me to get to share the stories of some remarkable people, and I consider to be incredibly remarkable. 17 years clean and sober in the music industry is no mean feat. As we get to the point where you decided that you needed to go down that route, I think we need to start off and get a little bit of a backstory on yourself. Tell us about life. I mean, you've seen my conversations, you've seen my interviews. We don't have the time to get into your full life story, but tell me about life for you growing up 0 to 20 years of age kind of thing.
So to try and condense it and get all the important bits in there as briefly
well, we're in no
as I
rush.
can.
You share as much as you want in as long a time as you want.
Don't say stuff like that to me.
I'll rein you in. Don't worry. If I feel you rambling, I'll just interrupt you.
I can talk. So I'm the eldest of three children. I was born and raised in Southeast London. I come from what I'd consider to be a very loving, caring family. My mum and dad were together their whole life. They'd done their absolute best for us. And I think that what happened, and I say some of this stuff with hindsight as well, Andy, because I don't think that I would have necessarily been able to articulate or vocalise some of this stuff that I recognise now in alignment with the time that I was growing up, or the chronological order at that particular time. So I think I'm pretty sure looking back, as I say, there's three of us. Now, if you speak to any three of us, I'm sure that we've probably got three very different stories of the exact same family and household that we was brought up in.
What are the
For
age
me,
differences?
so there's 2 years between each of us. I'm 51. My other two brothers he's going to be 48 and 46 in March. So there's about 2 years between each of us. And I think the other thing is as well is what I've learned is that parenting, when there's a number of children within the house, that the skills that I've learned as a parent, and also that my parents would have learned, some of the mistakes that they would have made with me. We're brought up by different parents at different times, even though we're brought up by the same parents. But I know for me, as a young child, I was quite a nervous, frightened kid. And funny enough, I was having a discussion with my mum a little while ago about some of the stuff. And I can remember on the odd occasion when I would hear them arguing, which wasn't it wasn't a regular occurrence. But I can just remember absolutely feeling terrified. And the experience that I got from that is that everything that I loved, every bit of security that I had in my world was about to be ripped away from me. And I can remember running upstairs, grabbing hold of my pillow, just getting underneath my bed and just grabbing hold of that pillow and holding it and crying it out, absolutely petrified that my mum and dad's relationship was going to end, the family was going to split up, and this was the way that I viewed life. This is or those events,
Okay.
and consequently, I think that added to the way that I viewed life in general, and with some of the stuff that I've learned, that the development stages of a child is that we don't develop the analytical part of our brain, the rational thinking part of our brain, until we're about 6 or 7 years old. So the message that a child gets from quite an innocent argument or disagreement can be very different to what's actually happening, to the way that they process it.
So
And
let me ask at this point. Sorry,
that's all right.
you have you say a lot of the information you've gleaned in hindsight. Do you want to tell us about one of the main contributing doctors that you would have started researching to give you this information? Because I think it's important to get this upfront, right?
Yeah, cool. I came into recovery itself, got clean and sober out of necessity because my life was an absolute disaster. And I was at crisis point. And I think that many people, in order to create a change within their life, it can be done in two states. It's either done in a state of joy and we embrace it. Alternatively, we wait for a crisis to turn up in our lives. And for me, I had to wait for a crisis to turn up. So I came into recovery, got clean and sober. I managed about 11 years, and I felt that there was just something missing, and I was lacking things in my life. And I went back and re-looked at the process that I was employing, and I felt that there was a lot more that I could be doing. And it was like it just seems, looking back now, it was a complete logical progression. And I started to. I wasn't academic at school at all. And I started to get into audiobooks. And one of the authors that I came across was a guy called Gabor Mate, which I've been to a number of his lectures, and I've read a few of his books, and I watch a load of his lectures that are available on YouTube as well, and various other places, and some of the Instagram lives that he does.
Okay, so I just wanted to get that out at the
Yep.
beginning, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to make it feel like I'm skipping you forward. Before we
No, no.
carry on, let me just ask you. I think your sweatshirt is rustling against your microphone. It's quite sensitive,
Okay.
so I'm getting quite a lot of. So just try not to let your microphone move too much.
Let me see if I can. Give me a moment, Andy.
No, it's fine. Just don't let. Yeah, you're going to go that way.
try that. That might hold it in place better.
Yeah, that's much better. That's perfect now. So go back and again at your own pace. Carry on back to your childhood. Sorry.
So yeah, I feel that I was probably quite a nervous, frightened child, and consequently, as a response to that, I think that I learned and adopted some quite unhealthy coping mechanisms, and I suppose one of the area that I grew up in, probably like a lot of us, was a council estate in southeast London, and it really wasn't a place for the faint-hearted, Andy. It was, you had to stick up for yourself, or you was going to be eaten and taken advantage of, because that's the way things happen around there. Especially
that makes it worse now. By the way, pull it
is
back
it
out.
really?
Yeah.
Is it really? Shall I try
No,
unplugging it
you'll
and
be fine.
try the phone mic?
No. Just pull it out as it was. Just try and be aware of when you're moving around. I'm sure people don't mind. We want to get the best experience. You're really cool. Just don't let it rustle against your sweatshirt.
All right, cool.
We're not on panorama here. I'm sure no one cares. That's
No, yeah,
perfect. That's
it does.
perfect now.
It does help if people can hear what I'm saying, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's not. Maybe it's just me being fussy, which is one of my hang-ups. As you were.
I think that I felt that I probably
Yeah, you were saying that the streets were quite mean. You needed to take care of yourself, and
and one of the things that I learned quite early on is that when I felt scared, that aggression was a way of making some people stand back from me. Despite the fact that I felt absolutely terrified inside, a lot of the time. I felt that I was constantly being judged. I felt that I wasn't good enough. I felt quite a lot of the time that there was going to be a sense of impending doom within my life. Also, to become quite comedian as well. That was another thing that, if I felt frightened or scared, was to try and make people laugh. So depending on who you was, and I felt what the best course of action was going to be to get my way around that, I would begin to overly compensate with some of this stuff. And then
okay, so your parents, you heard the arguing at home with your parents. Did did that eventually lead to the breakup, or was this okay?
No, they was together their whole lives. My dad passed away about 15 years ago,
Right.
and they was both very loving, caring parents. And I don't. What my mum said to me when we was having the conversation, she said, "Well, I never knew that," and of course she didn't, because I think that if anyone knows that they're imparting that onto their children, it's common sense when we say it out loud and we actually discuss it and talk about it. That we would find another alternative means of discussion out of the way, but then also it's not just about which again I've since learned, it's not just about vocally, physically what happens. It's about the environment itself. The atmosphere within the environment. Did I actually feel safe? Even when those arguments wasn't happening. And as I say, it wasn't a regular occurrence. It was periodically, every now and again. As I say, my mum and dad did their best. And one of the other things that went to shape my view of the world is, they struggled financially. They done their absolute best for us, and there was always food on the table, always clean clothes. Wasn't always the clothes that I wanted, but there was always clean clothes there for us. And I had it implanted in me that money is hard to come by. And that again went on to shape my relationship with money as well. And that had, I think, a big influence. Funny enough, I was watching, have you ever heard of Bruce Lipton?
I've heard of him. I don't really know much.
I was watching an Instagram clip of him the other day, popped up as I was aimlessly scrolling, and he was talking about people that come from certain types of families and the financial perception that they grow up in, and how that goes on to determine lack or not financially within their life. And he was talking about some very stupid people because they come from financially wealthy families. That shapes their financial, idea and the way that they see money, and they go on to be very successful. And again, that since having got sober and continuing with my personal development, I've realised that what is the mark of success, and what I used to class as success, I now question. Because the thing is that if someone gets a job that they're earning £60,000 a year, they have 2.4 children, they're married, they go on 2 holidays, they have a brand new car, and they've got nice watches, clothes, etc., etc. Does that necessarily mark someone as being successful in their life? And I've since realised that I don't think it necessarily does. I mean, what I class as successful is someone being liberated and free from their own mental and emotional states and being governed by the environment that they're in, whether that be socially, the peer groups, financially, whatever it is, because I do know some people that are quite wealthy and
unhappy.
Yes, absolutely.
I get you. Okay, so let's roll it back then to your early relationship, and then are there any pivotal? I use that word a lot. Are there any pivotal moments before you get into the military, or is it because of your childhood that you felt you were forced into the military?
No, so I mean, what happened was I was introduced to. I mean, I've had my first drink when I was about 13 years old, I suppose, and I've done the same as a lot of other kids done within the area. We were sniffing Tipex thinners, glue, and puffing. And
I laugh because we live parallel lives, council estate
right,
myself,
yeah,
exactly the same.
yeah. No, listen, it's fine. I know that normally when I laugh when someone's sharing something, it's because I identify with and relate to what they're saying, not because I necessarily find the catastrophic damage that some people cause in their lives funny, but it's because I relate. And what came with that is I had a huge relief from self. So when I talk about someone being successful in their life, and I talk about that liberation from someone's thoughts or feelings, that's what I found with alcohol. I got temporary relief from that permanent state that I'd found myself in for the previous 13 years.
Let me ask you though.
Yep.
In hindsight, the 50-year-old Ian can quite put that into such eloquent words. You couldn't have been aware that was happening back at the time. What kind of state and what did you think you were doing? You just having a crack with the lads? You didn't really know what was going on back then, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the only reason that I ever started smoking, Andy, because someone had a cigarette and they passed me a cigarette. I was too scared to turn it away. Mm-hmm. It was sitting over the park one day. Someone passed me a glue bag with Evo stick in it. I just took it and started sniffing it because they was doing it. It wasn't a conscious thought that, let me do that. I'm going to find temporary relief from this state, this emotional state that I find myself in most of the time. Mm-hmm. But obviously, the first time I did do it, I thought, shit, that is good. I'm going to do that again. After I come round or whatever it was, stop being sick.
I was going to say, stop being sick down yourself.
Yeah. And then obviously the progression of that, I certainly wasn't drinking alcoholically or using drugs in an addictive way from that moment on. But increasingly over the years, it did progress, my drinking and drug taking. And the acid house scene kicked off in 1988, and I was lucky enough to have that land on my doorstep by a promoter who put an all-dayer on up the road, and then I was introduced to LSD and ecstasy. And like many of us, I mean, that was a really important and exhilarating part of my life. I mean, I felt at that time that I was responsible for changing the world wholly by myself, Andy. And
I love it.
I did. I mean, it was a real important time in my life, and then I left school at 16 with no qualifications, got myself into work, and then in order to fund my drinking and drug taking the way that I like to do it, that I started to get involved in petty crime. And just before my 18th birthday, I can remember my old man having to come down and get me discharged from Catford Police Station. After having my house searched for drugs at the time, he was a bit pissed off, let me tell you. And
Pissed off because you brought trouble to the door. But okay, so let me ask the question this way: was he disappointed? Was he angry and disappointed to you, or just pissed off that the police had come to the door? Because if it's anything like half the people I knew, he wasn't so much bothered about what you were up to. It was more the fact that you brought the old bill to the house.
so my dad, as I get older, I realise from what my mum tells me since he's passed away, because it's been a big secret, something that he's never wanted to divulge. My dad actually had a very colourful past, according to my mum, from
I
what she
think
tells me.
everybody did back then, right?
yeah. And so the message that I got from my dad was that he was quite squeaky clean. And I honestly believed this until recently, Andy, till these very open and frank conversations that I've started having with my mum of late. And as I've become more comfortable in myself and probably got a little bit more articulate and a little bit more conscious of other people's feelings and how I say things, that I'm able to approach these conversations, and in turn, when we're able to do that, I think the people that we're talking to can become more sincere and more vulnerable, which I think is probably one of our purposes in life. So my perception is that it was quite squeaky clean. So at the time when it happened, I felt that it was disappointed in me because I was getting in trouble with the police, and because I brought trouble to the house. So it was a twofold, double disappointment, which, so, if I'm going to disappoint, I may as well do it the best way I can.
Okay, so you got into the you got into the petty crime.
Yeah, so he came down get me discharged from the police station, and it had a drink that night, and we walked home, and he gave me a right bollocking. And his brother had been in the army. He'd gone in at national service. So in the 80s, he was still in, and he had worked his way up from a private to major. So he had made a very successful career from it. And I can probably, in reflection, understand what my dad's train of thought was behind his suggestion. And his suggestion was, have you ever thought about joining the army, son? He said, I think it will make a man of you, right? And then he went on to speak to me about my Uncle Eric. And I think that he thought that if I could just get away from the people that I was hanging around with, that some of these problems that had started to surface within my life would no longer exist. But the main reason that these problems were beginning to surface in my life, I don't think were necessarily due fully to anyone else. I was responsible for a lot of the stuff that was happening. So it was under duress. I can remember going away and talking it over with some of my mates and saying, yeah, I'm thinking about joining the army. And there's a certain amount of bravado, ego, testosterone fueled at that age, and they all totally encouraged me.
It's just around the time of the Iraq War, right? Surely.
Yeah, before the Iraq War. Yeah, before the first Iraq War. The first Iraq War, I was actually serving in Paderborn in Germany. So I'd done my training and I'd gone to battalion by then. But see, this was another thing, another unhealthy coping mechanism that I'd learned to do within my life. That the truth is that internally, the thought of me going to join the army, when I sat down and discussed it with people, was one of terrific fear. But what happened, because of that ego and that bravado, once there was sort of like them, I felt like there was probably this invisible line that once I'd had a certain amount of banter with something, that now I can't go back on it. I've got to go and see it through, and I've got to go and do it. So I think that it was probably, definitely internally, on a personal level, I joined the army under duress. It certainly wasn't something that I really wanted to do as a career at that age.
Hmm. So just because I didn't get from that, you mentioned about the acid house 88. So was it around this time, 88, 89?
Yeah, so it would have been, I think, 89 that I went and done the army selection process. Went up to the careers office, went up to Sutton Coldfield, done the physical selection, and then there's a period between having done all of that and waiting for your allocation to go to the training camp to start that, and which is the same place that Mick McCormack went to.
That's
Who's
incredible.
yeah,
Mick McCormack listening is one of my friends. I mean, I'll say on record, Mick McCormack was not a glue sniffer. He was not on the Evo stick. He wasn't sniffing the gas. But we were razzing around Sutton Coldfield like tearaway 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. So it's nice to have you with us, Mick. Lots of love and fun memories with that gentleman. Okay, back to you, Ian. Good evening, Amy, by the way. Thanks for passing through. Yeah, so the army, did you struggle in the army, or did you find yourself?
no, I struggled.
Uh-huh.
I struggled. I can remember, right, the first day, well, not the first day, right, and this is a good example of sort of what had been happening and what was going to continue to happen in my life. I can remember the day that my mum and dad took me up to the train station for me to go and join the army. And at this point in their life, this is probably the proudest moment in their life. Their oldest son is about to go and join the army. And my dad is of the generation where men shouldn't really show their emotions, and he's all suited and booted to take me up to the train station, and he's holding back the a bit of fear, a bit of pride. His head's exploding where he's holding his emotions in, and going red. And my mum was all dolled up in her best frock, and that stuff only ever happened for very special occasions, Christmas parties, and taking her son off to go and join the army. And I can remember, and this is something that I talk about when I'm working with alcoholics and addicts within the field that I do, is that I can remember standing on that platform with my mum and dad and my two brothers, and the train coming in, and it was the old trains with the old single doors on with the old brass handles. Do you remember them? You used to open them, and I can see our I've since learned again. So our brains, right, don't know the difference between an actual event in our lives, right, and a memory. So there was a long time when I told this story, right, and it used to create
or a perceived memory.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's studies to say that 50% of the stories that we retell are embellished and not absolutely true, but they're in alignment with the way that we want to believe them when we retell these things. And as I say, there's scientific studies that back this up. But this is the truth, and it is the truth. It's the truth to me. It's the way I perceive it, so it is the truth. And I can remember opening that door and getting in and throwing my bag onto the luggage rack and turning around, pulling the window down behind me. And me telling this story, I was, for a long time, it used to create the same emotional response in me as it did that day, even years on. And imagine if that I'm able to do this with this story, the effects that other events and scenarios can go on to shape our perception and understanding of the world around us, especially if you look back at these development years from the age of 0 to 7 years old, when we haven't got that analytical part of the brain. We're in theta brain state, and that's why they say theta brain state is the same way that hypnosis and meditation works. You're in a very suggestive state, which is why we say that children are like sponges, because they soak up everything within their environment, and even as adults, as I say. So when I when I look back and was able to recollect this and realise the same emotional response as if the day that it had happened, as I say, the devastating consequences negatively that some of these stories that we tell ourselves can have upon the world that we live in. But obviously, by the same token, this can be used in a very positive way as well once we begin to understand the way that our minds and the way that our bodies work and the chemical responses and actions that consequently happen. So, anyway, back to the story. So, I pulled the window down, I shut the door, and the train pulled out, and I stuck my head out the window, and I can remember waving back to my mum and dad like this, and I can remember thinking, Ian, what the fuck are you doing? Right. And even though I'd had consideration of what it was I was about to embark on, suddenly in the cold light of day while I was on that train heading down to Winchester, it really did hit home that I might end up with people firing guns at me or bombs or shit. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? And I can remember sitting on that train with my head in my hands as an 18-year-old. I was probably at the emotional intelligence of a much younger teenager, is the truth as well, at that time in my life, because I don't think that I had that emotional development within myself and sitting there within my head in my hands thinking, what are you doing? And then I got up to Waterloo to make my connection, and I'd done what I'd learned to do over the previous 5 years or whatever it was that I'd been drinking and taking drugs. And I got off that train and I walked into an off license in Waterloo train station. I bought myself a few cans of beer. I pinged one of them cans of beer open, and this is what alcohol did for me. This is what drugs did for me. Suddenly, within one tin of lager, my whole perception of the situation suddenly changed. And I turned from a quivering, trembling wreck into John Rambo in about 15 minutes. I was like, right, I'm ready for this. Let's go to war. And honestly, I kid you not, I was like completely, up for it within that moment. And as I say, that's what alcohol did for me.
Was there, were you able to keep that going all through your training, or was the regime quite strict?
No, it's very, very, very strict. I mean, it was British Army training, and I was in the infantry, and I think at that time in the 80s, early 90s, the point of that army process was to try to break mentally and emotionally the ones that people, eventually these people that are training you, you might end up in a war zone standing next to one of them men. And I think that them men, that selection process is, would I want this man next to me on a battlefield? So the regime was mentally, physically, emotionally exhausting. But as I say, because of my nature, and I think you posted something the other day about it. It's quite often misquoted, isn't it? That only the strong survive, and that's wrong. It's the most adaptable of the species that survive, and I think that with my sensitivity growing up, is that it made me incredibly adaptable to certain situations, and I learned how to fit in quickly, and I learned to cope the best way that I could in that given moment. And a lot of the times it was in a probably it wasn't in a loving, caring, nurturing way to myself. It was probably in a very quite a damaging way to myself, Andy, that I learned. So, I grinned, I bared it, I got on with it, and a lot of the time, it's the truth that I was frightened. I was frightened.
So by the time you finished your service, did you serve the least amount of time, or did you go further than you actually expected?
No, I served less than my least amount of time because they asked me to leave. I got banged up in Colchester for 4 months for funny enough for drug and
probably.
Well, funny enough. So this is a whole nother live event. This is, but the short version is I'd come back to England. We was in Winchester, and there was a guy from Yorkshire. I still don't even know his name. We used to call him Yorkie, right? You know, typical army nicknames that we used to get. Another guy, I can't remember his name. And I said, listen, do you fancy driving up to London? I said, let's go. There was a night, Mad on Monday. I think it was Mad on Mondays at Heaven. I said, should we go up there? Come we? Because I was like into the rave scene. And we drove up there, and we'd gone up there, got peeled up, and we'd had this fantastic night. And we was driving home, and my mate Yorkie was driving, and we was driving around Trafalgar Square. And I was trying to guide him to get him back towards the A3 or M3, wherever it was we was coming back. And we needed to go down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace. And so we'd driven around Trafalgar Square a couple of times, missing it, me being peeled up, him not being very good at directions because he's peeled up. And as we managed to get onto the road towards Buckingham Palace, there's a car behind. And I honestly believe to this day that he'd never seen a police car without a blue light on top. And he's going, that car behind is flashing us. It's flashing us. It wants a race. And I've looked from the back seat where I'm looking, and I said, no, it was a Metro without a light on top. I said, no, it's the old Bill. You need to pull over. And he's put his foot down, and a very short chase has ensued. And they're absolutely hilarious. And so they pulled us up. They've come to the car. They've opened the car door. And as they've opened the car door, in his door compartment, as they've opened the door, they've heard a big rattle. He's got a big bloody army knife in the thing. So obviously they've gone to town on the search of the thing. Everyone had dropped their pills and puff and everything in the car. Consequently, they arrested us and they handed us over to the military police in Regent's Park Barracks. We eventually found our way back to Winchester, and then we got taken for a blood test. And although they couldn't prove who the drugs came from, just being positive on drugs is enough for a discharge and a criminal record in there. So I've 4 months in Colchester and I got asked to leave.
All right, so I need to kind of rein this conversation in slightly because we're getting way off of topic, and yet it is the perfect context to give us, a snapshot of the person that you are. And this is what, 20 years of age?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about how life progressed then when you were back on Civvy Street and your rapid downhill, your rapid decline.
So I came out. And this is another thing that I think that within that profession, that something needs to be looked at, Andy. You know what I mean? And massive advocate for it is that we're teaching these kids. Mick McCornack, he was in the junior leaders. He would have joined when he was 15 or 16 years old, right? We teach these kids to go and fight and to go and kill and to be institutionalized, right? And to not act as an individual, but act as a body of men. That's the whole idea of the army, to act together, right? And we teach these kids to do this stuff. And then when we're done with them, we just release them, And then the reintegration, coming back into civilian life, even within my short time within the army. So God knows what it's like for someone that served, 6,
3
9,
or 4
12.
tours.
Yeah. What help is there for these people to do that? And so when I came out of the army, I probably came out more mentally and emotionally damaged than when I went in. So one thing that had begun to happen a lot is me blacking out when I was drinking, and I can remember being introduced to cocaine. I think the first time that I did it, I didn't really like it, but like most good addicts, I persevered with it. And
good man.
I know. But one of the things that I did discover is that I didn't black out quite as much when I drank it. So
when you sniffed it, when you drank, and then you had, yeah.
So it seemed like the perfect solution to my problem at the time. And then sort of, there's that period that most alcoholics and addicts will go through where, there's a lot of fun. And then it's sort of like followed with not so much fun, and then a whole heap of damaging consequences. And I suppose that I reached the point where whenever most of the times I would say, not 80% of the time, probably 60%, 40%. 60% of the time, in the later years, I'd become dangerously antisocial when I began to drink and take drugs. I was unable to predict when that would happen.
As in volatile.
Yeah.
Okay.
I met a girl. We fell in love. We got married. We had some kids, and I ripped that family apart from the inside out with my drug addiction, alcoholism. And I've done more damage to them kids than, yeah, it was awful, absolutely awful. That didn't work, and then sort of, that aided and with that self justification and rationalization, that added to my, reason to carry on the way that I was, because, life's not fair to me. This was the way that I viewed things. And consequently, it reached I actually went to my first meeting, right, knowing that I had a drink problem in 1994.
Wow.
And I was going to spend the next 11 years going in and out, trying to get in recovery. And the truth is, again, in reflection, I didn't understand this at the time. I didn't really want to get sober throughout them 11 years, Andy. What I wanted it was more of a demonstration to someone else in my life that I'm really sorry for what I've done. You should be grateful for what I'm doing, and you should get off my back. That's the truth. And I wanted the consequences to stop. I didn't want to. Listen, I thought for a long time that I really didn't care what people thought or the way that they felt about me. But I since now know what a sensitive soul I am, that's so far from the truth. And because that I do care so much what people think and the way that they feel about me, because of the way that I was living and the things that I was doing, I found myself on this hamster wheel that I was completely unable to get off. And the emotional and mental torture that went with it, on the times that I'd wake up sober and come to the realization of the carnage that I caused, in the days prior, would just create the only way that I knew how to deal with that, with my limited information and resources that I had available to me at that particular time, was to start drinking again.
Well, you're a very articulate person. Were you always so articulate? Were you always so?
Right.
Would you class yourself as being intelligent? Because you come across as very intelligent.
Well, I really wasn't academic at school, right? So I think that we may as well mention about ADD.
We'll get there. we'll get there. All in good time.
So look, I think that, what happens, it's right. I wasn't academic at school. I used to zone out a lot, right? I used to daydream a lot. I used to stare out the window, and that was my way of dealing with things. Someone's either going to zone out if they're suffering from ADD, and there's a couple of responses, right, when someone's suffering from stress within their life, and all living organisms are designed to withstand short-term stress. And what happens within our bodies is that invariably speaking, when the stress hormones are activated, which was essential to our evolution as a species, as human beings, that stress response was probably created a lot more efficient and effective when we was roaming around and there was saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that we had to defend ourselves from.
It was rough. It was rough where you brought up, wasn't
it? yeah. Well, but obviously now we still have the same stress responses, but the threats within our lives have very much changed. And it's, partners, it's jobs, it's work emails, it's, social media, financial pressures, social conditions, But they create the exact same social stress responses. And I mean, what happens is that, you know, when that is activated within us, the chain reaction that happens is that when we're under that stress, it's not a time to think. So the blood is pumped away from our neocortex, which is our, you know, our rational thinking part of the brain, because now it's not a time to think, it's a time to act on impulse and instinct. So we want to rely on those measures. There's huge amounts of energy that are immobilized through the body, cortisol and adrenaline are pressed through the body. Blood is pushed away from the internal organs into our extremities, and that's in order to the fight or flight response. Now, we're either going to prepare to run away, right, or fight. And if we can't do either of them, we're going to freeze, right? So ADD and ADHD are the same thing, but different responses to the
presence of stress.
Yeah, exactly. So we're either going to become hyperactive or we're going to learn to zone out. And that's one of the things that I learned to zone out. So in school, I would find myself, not, you know, it wasn't a decision that I made. It was a coping mechanism that I adopted that worked for me. I was very much a daydreamer, you know, and I would zone out. So consequently, I'm sure many of us that don't even suffer from anything like this would, you know, as teenagers growing up, would have had a similar thing on our school reports. Very capable, only if he applied himself in class more, you know. And I didn't leave school with any academic qualifications, but since I suppose getting sober and then wanting to educate myself about this stuff, and I would have classed myself up to 17 years ago as quite an uneducated person. But I've since found out that, you know, I'm not. I can be, if the topic is right, I have a personal interest in it, that I'm actually a very academic person, and I have an absolute
with the right what's the word? Motivation, with the right stimulus.
Absolutely, and
stimuli,
yeah. And the thing is, so what I've learned is that I was looking for my Audible account earlier, and not all of the books on there. And I think from the last 4 years, I think I've got about 75 books in there, somewhere of the region of that, and there's a load more on there. The vast majority of them are personal development books.
Well, let me stop you. Forgive me.
Yeah.
I want to say hi to Sarah and Dean, who are watching. She's saying that Dean Battersby totally relates to everything that you're saying. So I'm going to roll you back now. I'm going to take you back to before you got sober, before we start talking about the books and the learning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you got to. I guess you must have got to rock bottom to realize that things needed to change.
Yeah. So, listen, I'm going to be incredibly frank and honest, right? So, one of the things, right, and a lot of people say to me now, I can't imagine you like that, because a lot of people that I know now only know the sobering. So when I talk about me becoming dangerously antisocial, is one of the behaviours that I demonstrated within my intimate relationships, is that I become a complete emotional, mental, and physical bully within those relationships. And where I grew up, my dad never laid his hand on my mum, ever, right? And where I grew up, anyone that done anything like that was a complete wronger, right? And they deserved to absolutely get weighed in, right, and get their comeuppance. And I accept full responsibility, right, for the actions that are carried out, and I'm certainly not being dismissive about any of this stuff or blasé. And there's not many regrets that I have in life, Andy, right? Because one thing that I've learned is that every path that I've taken has been absolutely essential to getting me where I am now. One of the regrets that I do have is violence within my relationships, right, towards my partner.
Mhm.
And what happened is that this time when I came into recovery, I woke up in a police cell, not knowing why I was there. And I rung the buzzer, let me out for a fag. They said, "You're going in for an interview." And they took me in for the interview, and I'd done it again. I'd beaten up my girlfriend and I'd beaten up one of her mates. And I knew that that girl, as my wife did, absolutely loved me, right? And I can remember breaking down in the interview, thinking, I just cannot carry on living my life like this. And I can remember getting taken back to the police cell and that door being shut behind me. And I can remember having what some people describe in recovery as a moment of clarity. And what that was is that it had nothing to do with my mum, my dad, my brothers, the army, the things that I'd been exposed to in the army, my ex-wife. None of those things were responsible for the way that I was acting in that moment. And I knew that the buck stopped with me. And I knew that if I didn't stop doing this stuff, I was going to end up dead. Because I honestly believe that I was emotionally and mentally, I was at a point where I was already dying inside. Um, and um, and I came back. I came back to London because that happened in Kings Lynn, and quite rightly, the girl got an injunction out against me. And I came back to London, and I got in contact with one of my good pals who had been sober for a couple of years at that point. And another thing, right, is that round where I lived, right, I don't say this in some blasé way. I've never actually sat down and counted it. There must be probably 20, 30 people that I used to have it with that have all ended up in recovery. There's a fair few that have lost their lives along the way. There's probably a fair few that are still out there at it that probably need recovery in their lives as well. And I came back and I said, "Look, I need your help, Tone." And he helped me get back into the meetings. And I can remember going back into my mum and dad's house, and my mum and dad knew what I'd become. And fortunately, and this is why, that bond with both my parents, they never ever turned their back on me. I smashed up their houses. I put paving slabs through their front door windows. I treated them absolutely despicably. And they never turned their back on me. I can remember knocking on that door. I rang my mum from Kingsley and she said, "Come back." And as I knocked on that door, and my dad, absolute disgust, he couldn't look at me in the eye when he let me back into the house. And I just had a bin bag with some clothes in. That's all I had. And that was the turning point in my life.
That was your rock bottom.
Yeah.
So
But just to mention as well, Andy, is that that event in itself had happened quite a few times in my life.
right.
So that wasn't the first time that happened. I ended up in police cells, covered in blood, right? Not necessarily my partners, but waking up in a police cell, not knowing why I'm there, thinking, "What have I done this time?" Right? And that was, it had happened to me a number of times. So I think that what happened is on that event, something different inside me happened. Something clicked mentally, something clicked emotionally, spiritually, whatever the term is you want to call it. And something snapped that grabbed all of my attention and made me look at the event from an entirely different angle, probably for the first honest time in my life.
Okay, so that was just doing some very quick maths there. I'd say 2005 then.
Yes, yeah.
2004, 2005.
June the 3rd, 2005.
um the so you'd already experienced recovery before, as you say, over like a 10-year period, in and out,
Yeah, well, I
more or
mean,
less.
I'd say experience recovery. As I say, I mean, I wasn't there to give myself to, I wasn't there in a committed sense
Mhm.
of the word. I was there, as I say, to as a demonstration to someone else in my life. Look,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry for what I've done. I'm really
Give me
sorry
another
for,
chance.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, so, good evening, James. Thanks for commenting. I did see you join us earlier. He says a great conversation. Massive praise for Ian for opening himself up to us. The recovery. I mean, how much do we want to talk about the recovery? Because there's still a lot of this conversation that we want to get at. I'm really keen for you to impart a lot of the wisdom that you've gleaned. So maybe if we touch very briefly on the recovery, and then we start talking about, the research and a lot of the things that you've learned, and how that's made you reflect on your life to become the person that you are now.
Yeah. So, I mean, recovery itself is without a doubt the most important, significant event that has happened in my life, without a doubt. Um, I learnt the ability to turn one of my biggest problems into one of my biggest assets. And I know that we had a short discussion over Messenger a couple of weeks ago, which I think prompted
Yeah.
this invitation. And like
Yeah,
many of,
Ian was the one who accused me of being having ADD.
I accuse everyone. No,
Carry on,
it's just
carry
that
on, carry on.
I, I think you're very, from what I know of you, and we're not the closest of people. Um, I know that you're very meticulous and you're very precise, and um, you like things done in a certain way, and you come across quite controlling as well. Like, and
To put
listen,
that mildly, to put that mildly.
and I think that look, when I come across some of this material, Andy, is that I didn't start reading it thinking that I had any of this stuff. It's as I've come into recovery and I've continued to develop um, my quest in self discovery or personal development or enlightenment, whatever the phrase is that's most palatable for the individual, is the one that I always, urge them to use. And as I've sort of, embarked upon that, I've sort of gained this understanding that the more that I begin to understand myself, the more useful I become to most other people,
Mhm.
because I still can be quite sensitive at times, um, and take things personally. But a lot of the time, it gives me the understanding that, we shouldn't take things as personally as we do. And sometimes, the most minor disagreement or opinion that opposes mine can become so important to me within that precise moment, right? And absolutely rule me, rule my life.
Mhm.
Um, and the more that I understand this stuff about myself, the more, as I say, the more useful I think I can become to other people in understanding them, and in
So,
my,
so the more you understand the triggers, the more you understand your response, and you more you understand how to combat that. It gives you the toolbox to be able to see life in a different way, right? And
yeah.
to approach different. You're a completely different person. So how long ago was it I came and you kindly picked me up from the airport? We went for lunch and whatever.
Oh,
How many years ago
that
was that?
I
10 years?
think I don't know. I think that was the Beat Players party, wasn't it?
It was
VB
beat player.
Beat
So
Beat. Yeah,
10 years? I don't know. But
yeah, yeah.
you were
So
completely, not completely, you were sober then, but you are a more, you're more, I don't know, a deeper person now than you were back then. Would you agree that you've changed in the last few years?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Most
And I think,
definitely.
I mean, I think for me, on an individual level, is that see if um, I don't mean this in some resentful, laborious way, right? That I mean it in a very liberating, freeing way, right? That the more that I discover, the more freedom that I'm able to find for myself, right? And the attachment to my emotional and mental states, and other people's. The more freedom that I find within that, the more it persuades me and encourages me and inspires me to want to continue on that journey. Because I think that, 17 and a half years clean and sober, if this is what I've been able to achieve within that time, and as you've just said, within the last 10 years, you recognize a noticeable change. And internally, mentally and emotionally within myself, I probably recognize it more than you do. And the thing is, so if I've been able to achieve this within that amount of time, if I continue chipping away, chopping the wood, carrying the water, what else can I achieve? What's the next level of freedom that I'm able to achieve?
That's your motivation. Okay, so
Mm.
I'm gonna take you back to recovery. I want to take you back to your learnings, your lessons. But during recovery, so one question I'll ask: are you comfortable now that you're confident that you'll never ever, go back and touch a drop of drugs or alcohol?
So look, I mean, there's right now my decision to stay sober is from a lifetime.
Hmm.
But the amount of time that I've spent in recovery, um, I've seen better men than me that have veered off of the path.
Does
And
that scare you?
no,
You're not scared?
it doesn't scare me because I know that as long as I employ the formula and I continue to develop myself on a personal level with that thirst for, wanting to call out my own bullshit within my own life. As long as I continue on that path, I've got absolutely no doubt that I'll be able to stay sober. The key is being able to stay on that path. And the thing is like, listen, I don't equate myself to, but this is someone that I heard this inspirational guy speaking. I was actually away on a retreat, and he was talking about, days when we don't quite feel like it. And what he said was, do you think there was days when Mother Teresa didn't quite feel like it? Do you think there was days when Nelson Mandela didn't feel like it? And the thing is they was inspired enough to get on, get up, keep chopping the wood, carrying the water. So if those people can do it on that level, we're no different. Them people are no different to us. And some days are better than others, and some days it's just putting one foot in front of the other. And some days it's just me recognizing and accepting and acknowledging the way that I feel, and I'm human. I don't feel 100% of the time.
Hmm. I
So, and
get you.
it's the acceptance around that stuff and the realization of it.
Okay, so the majority of our conversation has been very deep and very gripping, surrounding, the journey that you took, and then along the way, I wanted to mention early on, the work of Gabor Mate, and you saying that you've been and seen him a few times and read a lot of his books. You prompted me to read Scattered Minds, one of his books. And I thought, yeah, okay, no problem. I got the audio book. I listened to it. As soon as I finished it, I promptly sent you a message and said, no, I'm not ADD. I definitely see some of the traits in there that would bring you to that conclusion. But, being on that journey of self-discovery myself, I just chuckled and I thanked you because it helped me to understand people that I know who are. And actually, you may be able to put me right because Gabor Mate said, you either say you don't address them as people who are who have ADD, because the language is very, very clever what he uses. But anyway, I'm rambling on. It's helped me to understand some of my friends who also have some of those traits. And it's also enabled me to reach out to other friends and say, you should read this book. I think it might enlighten you. So tell us about what you learned from Gabor Mate, and if anyone doesn't know him, about exactly what it is that he does.
So he's probably, certainly in my view, I don't know whether the world would agree with me. He's probably one of the world's leading authorities on trauma, drug addiction, ADD, ADHD, and other associated, what the rest of the medical profession may classify as diseases. The significance of what captures my attention from him is his own personal experience. And he was a Jew brought up in Hungary. And he talks about his mum and dad of the invasion of the Nazis, and he was taken along to be evacuated, I think, by his aunt and uncle. And obviously, as we sit here and discuss this, we can, as adults, in reflection, we can see that his parents were carrying out an act, right, to ensure the safety of baby Gabor. The message that he got from that was that he was being thrown away and abandoned as a 3-year-old, and consequently, that trauma led to him learning a lot of these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And I think that primarily, something that we were talking about earlier, which you stopped me, in case I didn't mention it later on, is that some of these coping mechanisms that we learn, ADD, ADHD, drug addiction, alcoholism, shopping, gambling, sex, gym, work. People demonstrate these behaviours within their life as a temporary act to relieve themselves from some of the mental and emotional states that they find themselves in. And I know with Gabor Mate, he had massive abandonment issues. He talks openly about his relationship with food. He talks about his shopping addiction as well. He was working as a doctor it must have been in a maternity hospital, ward or whatever you call it, and he actually left a patient on giving birth so that he could run down to his local HMV, because he moved from Hungary over to Canada. He left the patient on the table with the nurses while he ran down to their equivalent of HMV to get the latest release of some classical CD that had been released, for the need to fulfill that addiction within himself, which he...
Well, let's skip past his actual story, because people can read up on that. But I want you to nail on some of the things that made you realize, to look and say, okay, so the ADD, and because his teachings are they're very important, and everybody would do really well to read up on them, because it does tell us a lot about our childhood, as you say, about the triggers, about the traumas that we suffer. And you say that the young child is very narcissistic. They believe the whole world revolves around them, and everything that happens is due to them, right? That's the path that you were saying.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason I've just to skip back to that, I won't go on about it, but the significance is because of Gabor's own personal experience and his position within the field. Gives him a unique standing in my eyes, because he openly discloses this stuff about him. Right. And I think that there's a lot of people that, perhaps get into that field that don't relate their own personal experience. So for me, it carries a lot more depth and weight with some of the things that he speaks about. So, and as I say, when I started to pick up on his material, I mean, I can't remember exactly which one it was, which book it was. I picked up one of his books, and this is one of the books that are contained within my Audible library. And some of the majority of the books on there are what I would consider to be textbooks, and this is all the stuff that I know. So I'm not insulting anyone's intelligence, but it's stuff that I didn't necessarily know, Andy. So I would consider a lot of the books that I have in there as textbooks. And obviously, the idea of a textbook is to transfer the knowledge of from the author to the reader, and they're to be used, in my opinion, totally different to a novel. A textbook is to be studied and understood, and that's what I try to do with these more with these personal self-development books that I go into. So as I started to pick up on his what do you call it?
Pick up on his works, his
pick
material.
Up, yeah, exactly. Pick up on his material, and as I started to read, more particularly the stuff about ADD, our responses and our coping mechanisms that some of us may employ, it just began to drive home on another level, something that I hadn't even entertained within the recovery sense. And I really related, and I really begun to understand and directly relate back to my life. And it made perfect sense to me, some of the coping mechanisms that I began to demonstrate, and many people will demonstrate. And as a result of that, that's then propelled me to go on and look at some of the other things that he discusses and do other research. And I honestly believe that, it's not. What's that guy's name that you like? This Diary of the CEO,
Stephen Bartlett.
Stephen Bartlett. He done a conversation with him, didn't he?
Uh-huh.
And Stephen Bartlett quoted on that interview with him, which is taken from Gabor's book, that in the 1990s in America, there was 1 in 20 children diagnosed with ADD. And now, today, it's 1 in 9 children, right, that are diagnosed with ADD. So that probably means one of two things. Number one, we've got better at diagnosing it. Or number two, something within society has changed massively. Now, within that time scale, that's not enough time for genes to change in the evolutionary process. It takes generations and generations for genes to change. And I honestly think it's because of the stress and the trauma that people have begun to encounter with the way that our lives changed. And if we go back just a couple of 100 years, when we look at, I think that the way that people's roles have changed within lives, what's expected, what is classed as successful, how a lot of people must strive and achieve that success within their life. And if we go back to, after, just before the Second World War, women should be allowed to work if they want to work. Of course they would. But I'm saying about the family.
You're
unit.
Protecting yourself here. Disclaimer.
Absolutely. But I'm talking about how much the family unit has changed since after the Second World War, and even in my lifetime. Right. So predominantly, as a general rule of thumb, the wife generally stayed at home. She created a caring, loving, nurturing environment, the best way that she knew how to bring up and develop the children that she'd been given and put in charge of. When you came to visit my house 10 years ago, Andy, where I lived, if I look up and down that road, right, the majority of the houses within that road now, with two parents, right, both parents work, right? So the family unit has changed in that sense alone, that most parents, as a necessity, need to work in order to provide a decent standard of living for that family. Now, if we go back before that, I think traditionally, as the family unit, we would look at that there was, for a long, long time, children would be born, whole families would live in a whole house. You would have grandparents, parents, children living in that. And then if we go back before that, to sort of, tradition, culture, tribes, the kids would be born, the childbirth would be charged to the younger women within that tribe, within that clan, within that community. And then when that child was born, it would be handed over to the elders within that community who have learned a certain amount of wisdom within their life, right? And that child's feet wouldn't touch the floor for the first 2 years. It would be nurtured, it would be loved, it would be 100% devoted to and for, right? So as we look back, I think for me, with some of the stuff that Gabor Mate has raised, and I begin to understand this, the change within society, the change within communities. Listen, even growing up, right, when I grew up in South East London, all the way around the gardens, the back gardens, right, they used to have these little picket fences right around. And I can remember my mum as a child shouting out down the road to neighbour, 6, 7 doors down, hanging the washing out, you're right, Maureen, blah, 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 all of this stuff. And there was a real deep sense of community where I was raised, right? And where I live now, and as I look out onto, most of the back gardens where I overlook, they've all got 6-foot fences around them, right? Not all of the neighbours know each other, right?
Okay, I'm going to put a pause in this conversation, right? Just let me
Yep.
say one thing. Wendy's watching. Good evening, Wendy. I got my pen here. I'm making notes. She says trauma and addiction. It's hard sometimes to tell the difference because you get both the same presentation. So thank you for that, Wendy. I'm going to stop you going down the social commentary route because that we're aware of the change of society. I want to focus on your own personal story now and some of the ways that you've the again, coming back to what I said before, the reading the material that you've taken on from Gabor Mate, some of the most mind blowing things that you've read, that you've had that aha moment along the line of self development and beginning to love yourself. I'm assuming you forgive yourself now, right?
Yes, yes. And that's something that I need to continue to work at within certain areas of my life. I mean, largely as a whole, I'm relatively probably 80-90% happy with who I've become, with the person that I am, with the compassion, understanding that I'm able to demonstrate towards people in general. And I think that one of the aha moments, which was it Wendy who just said about
Yeah.
trauma and addiction. And this is something that Gabor Mate said. He's not everyone that suffers trauma will become an addict or an alcoholic, but all addicts and alcoholics will have suffered some trauma within their lives. And the thing is that, and this was the moment for me, is that what is a trauma? The trauma is not an external event. A trauma is an internal event. It's an internal event to an external. It's an internal response to an external event.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that we could sit here and we could make a spectrum, a graph of what trauma might look like, and starting at one end with maybe the single parent who gets a parking ticket, who can't afford to pay it, or they're wondering how they're going to feed their kids this week, where that money's going to come from, or whatever the case may be, to the other end, to seeing, some poor child watch their whole family wiped out, machine gunned down. And this is not, certainly, of course, it's not a competition, but within those two ends of that spectrum, from one end to the other, the trauma, the event that actually happens internally to each individual, is pretty much the same event.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding that it doesn't, regardless of, for me, it helped me understand the level. It had nothing to do with my mum and dad. It wasn't that they wasn't to blame. It was my perception and understanding and my response to some of the things that had happened within my life. And these things that happened within my life, which I began to develop these rather unhealthy coping mechanisms, were my ways of coping with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying to you, Andy, is that earlier on, coming back from the hospital today, I'm feeling a little bit of stress, a little bit of pressure, and I can feel it in the back of my neck. I can feel it across my shoulders, feel it in the base of my back, in my hips and my knees. And it's stress. It's a chemical response to something that's happening in my life. But I know that prior to coming into recovery, this is something sober that I felt most of the time. No wonder I used to drink and take drugs. No wonder, before I found drinking drugs, I used to find this way of zoning out, of being able to detach myself from what was going on around me at school when I didn't want to engage. It was my coping mechanism. Again, it was one of them things at school for me. I would never want to get picked on like by the teacher. I would never want to get asked a question. And I don't think that thing is exclusive to children with ADD, but I think it's probably exaggerated. I can remember sitting there absolutely petrified. Please don't ask me a question. Please don't ask me a question. Even if I knew the answer, I would still question myself, convinced that I'd still get it wrong. There was no level of confidence or knowingness within me, and I would do my best to avoid, some of that stuff at all costs, whether it be, trying to get removed from the class or.
I get you. So, with the recovery, I've had one or two people contact me in the past who have been in recovery, and they've reached out to apologize to me for certain things that have happened that they saw as quite momentous moments in their journey, and I'm since to understand that's something that a lot of people get asked to do, to go back and put things right that they believe they've done wrong, when they were on that destructive road. Did you ever reach back to some of your ex-partners? I guess the question is, what's your relationship with with the daughter's moms? And did you ever reach out to any exes that you felt that you wronged? And how were you received?
So my ex-wife, yes. I put my hand out to her. So look, I mean, the purpose of it for me, and the way that I understand it, is that if I want to walk this earth a free man, or as free as I can get, I can't afford to be suppressing, depressing, right? Emotions, worried about some of the things that I've done in the past coming back to haunt me. And I have to do my utmost to be able to put this stuff right to the degree that I can. Now, some people, um, so for instance, the girl that I ended up that I got arrested for that brought me into recovery this time, someone that I've not seen for years. Would it have been right for me? And so for me, it's about motives and understanding this. Would it have been right for me after not having been in their life, them having gone through some recovery process and rebuilding themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would it then be right for me to turn up out of the blue, knocking on a door with a declaration that I want to put things right? Under those circumstances, I think I probably could have done more damage than harm. I did reach out privately, and that was declined. But I'd done my utmost. And the thing is, as I say, so for me, it's about motive. So if I put my hand out and someone doesn't want to accept my sincere desire to set such matters straight, then I need to accept that because that's their decision. It's not an opportunity for me to clear my conscience. It's an opportunity for me to set them matters straight with them. So my ex-wife, I've done my best to put things right there. As you can imagine, things are still a little bit fractured. And with regards to my two children, that that repair process, even 17 years on, is still effective. It's still happening because what I mean by that is, this continued personal development and understanding, is that the more that I understand this stuff about myself, the more I can see some of the struggles in other people, and that probably makes me a little bit more compassionate and understanding towards other people's needs. Also, some of the struggles that they might encounter, that they go through individually within their lives, not just but all of my children. Um, it's not, what I've learned is it's not the question of giving, but the timing in which to give. And I'm not on about necessarily making amends here, but I'm on about offering advice, offering a solution. Because another thing that I've learned through these textbooks, through my quest, is that I think for me, certainly listening is a skill that I'd lost. So most of the times when I was having conversations with people, I was either thinking of a way to fix their problem if they was telling me an issue or something that they had going on within their life, or I was thinking about the response, the reply that I was, to actually consciously give myself to that moment, to that person, on an intimate level, was something that I'd certainly lost within my life. So, but to understand that and then to watch my children develop, go through some of them struggles, while doing my best to employ some of the things that I've learned, is to give them that time and space, not offer my solution, not ram it down their throat, and try and wait for the timing to be right before I do any of that stuff. And invariably, I think the best moment is when someone comes to simply ask for advice or a little bit of help or a little bit of unsure. And the thing is what I try to sell to all of my children. And, the older two from the ex-wife, that damage was done earlier on. And consequently, I became estranged to my children for about 5 years. I didn't see them. And I convinced myself that they was better off without me because of the way that I was living. And then my children that I have now, is that what I want to become, and to all of my children, the ones prior as well, is that the type of parent that I want to come, and this is what I try to get across to them, is that yes, I'm a parent, right? But I want to build a nurturing, loving, caring relationship with you. That if you ever find yourself in trouble, I want you to be, shit, I need my dad. I need to ring my dad. I don't want that first thought to be shit. I can't ring my dad, which is um, which was
The immediate
my
response that
perception.
you had. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
So it's trying to take this stuff that I learn and continue to develop because, like I've been through that time within the last 17 years when I've done my best to change people around me as well, Andy. And then, again, when I bring it back to myself and I realize in some areas of my own life how difficult it can be for me to change, what chance have I got of trying to change other people? That's not tried me. That's not stopped me from trying in the past, though. Let me tell you.
I think you'd be surprised. As you said before, you being so inspired by Gabor Mate, however you pronounce it, because he's walked the walk.
Yep.
He's you laid some weight on his words because of the experiences that he has in life.
Yep.
Someone sitting listening to your story cannot help but think, oh my God, this bloke knows his shit. He's been through hell and back, and look where he's at now. If anyone can help me, then it's going to be Ian Dad's. Do you know what I mean? That's the first thing I would think, surely.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and that's the significance, I think, of people like Gabriel Mate, right? Is that because of their own direct personal experience, me personally being able to relate to their own. So we bring it from that textbook scientific, you know, level to this guy, right? Is happy to disclose his own experience. One of the things that he talks about he's been in bed with his wife about 50 years old, and his wife rejected him and refused sex with him. And he said that he found himself turning over in the fetal position, sulking like a 3-year-old child. And
Yeah.
he asked him, and I can relate to that stuff, Andy. Not necessarily
I
that,
am
but
listening. Wendy's just asking about the book. I'm just going to type it out for her. Carry on talking. I am
so
listening.
let me. There's it's called Scattered Minds. There's another one called The Body Says Now. The Body Says No, which is on diseases. There's another one called Hungry Ghost, which is about addiction, and there's another one, and the name eludes me right now.
Hmm.
But they're all by Gabor Mate. There's a lot of his lectures that are available on YouTube as well. Some absolutely magnificent stuff. Um,
Brilliant.
so
Yeah, you were talking about he was in the fetal position. His wife rejected him, and it immediately brought back. No, it was. I don't think it was his wife. He was being. He was in a therapy session, and he was regressing into a therapy session, and it brought back. He started crying memories of when he was young. I think that's
that's
what you're
right.
recounting.
Yeah, the event is that happened in bed with his wife after being refused sex, and then he big and this is the significance because he's adopted and employed the formula, right, in which he talks about it being necessary in the treatment of the understanding of some of the trauma that we may have experienced, right, regardless of how healthy a family we feel that we've been brought up in, right. Um, there would be some unhealthy stuff which we experience, and he's spoken about this. I've spoken to people about it, and people that maintain that they've come from a very loving, caring family. And there was one girl in particular that was bullied at school as a teenager, and spoke about, well, who did you talk to about it? I didn't talk to anyone. How did that make you feel as a teenager, not being able to trust anyone enough to be able to share that stuff? It's a form of, I'm not saying that that is a trauma, but that goes on to begin to develop a sense of environment, who we can and who we can't trust. It goes on to shape our intimate relationships, the way that we view the world, what we can disclose, what we can't disclose. Um, you know, and so and what happened is Gabriel Mate traced that back and to that time when he, the rejection and abandonment that he felt as a 3-year-old standing on that train station that day when he was being given to his aunt and uncle for the evacuation process as the Nazis invaded Hungary.
It's crazy. I had a conversation with a lady. I think it was earlier this year, Nicola, and she was also a student of Gabor Mate, and she was talking about a few of these situations as well. And it was really quite enlightening. I listened back to one of the conversations, and it's just so these things. It just blows. As you say, everyone can glean something from it, right? Whether you from a healthy, because we all have our baggage. We've all got our issues.
Yeah,
I don't care who you are. We've all got our issues, and when you understand where these come from, are you still with me? You're losing power.
Yeah. No, I was just checking it, but the battery life's not there.
It's all good. Well, listen, I'm going to start to wrap this up now anyway, because we are otherwise we'll end up sitting here talking all evening, as fascinating as it is. So we got your incredible story of your road into drink and drugs. We got your incredible story about the recovery. We touched on the recovery story, and then we touched about how you understood about your ADD, and how you've been able to deal with it. And Wendy says the body holds the score. I think that may
That's
be
a great book.
That's the
Fantastic
title
book.
of one of the books.
Yeah.
So if we're going to start wrapping this up, Ian, tell me what life looks like for you now, apart from at this precise moment with the worry of your mum over you. What is your current journey of enlightenment? Where are you at?
So at the moment, privately, I've got some other stuff going on. Uh, Personal circumstances. And one thing that I've learned along the way is that, look, I'm not a religious person, right? One thing that I do believe in is that there is some power out there that underlies the rhythm of the universe. I just can't believe that we've ended up here by accident out of a big bang, out of nothing. There has got to be some sort of intelligent creativity behind it all. And to the extent that, I think that quantum physics goes to prove some of that as well. When you got people like Einstein, Max Planck, some of the great physicists that talk about,
don't start reeling their works off, whatever you do.
No, just to quote them really, really, really quickly, is that is the more that they understand about quantum physics, the more that they found it unable to deny that there was an intelligence at work that underlie everything, and that is what the power that I believe in. And I facilitate some meditation workshops as well, which I've done for the last few years privately. And to the extent where there's even agnostic meditation courses and places that have popped up now, because they too believe in the quantum physics, that power, that invisible field, the unifying field that combines everything together. And that power I know exists and runs through my life. And I'm not trying to convince anyone else, right? It's on a completely personal level, with a sense of knowingness that no one can ever take this away from me. And with the personal circumstances I'm going through at the moment, right, there's not an event, even when I was at the height of my drug addiction and alcoholism, Andy, that when I've entered the event here, and it feels at times that my life has been falling apart, and everything that I love and everything that I work for is beginning to slip away from me, right? And by the time I come out of the other side of it, and that time scale in between might be different, and there's a lot of different events that happen, without exception, I have never, ever come out of the other side worse off than when I started. And my sense of journey is to continue to develop a stronger faith and understanding in that everything happens in life for an absolute reason, even though I can't make direct sense of it at that particular moment. Um, to continue to trust the process of life, and that intelligence has got a greater purpose for me.
I don't think there's any better way for me to say thank you. And to end, what I was going to say was, I don't think there's any better way for me to end than to just say thank you, because you just summed that up perfectly. You cut the end of the conversation, nailed it with that quote. If I was going to, I would edit that out, stick it at the front, and say, "This man's got some tails." Do you feel that you've got everything across that you wanted to? Because I think you did.
Absolutely
Definitely.
not. No way. We've just scratched the surface, Andy.
Well, we'll definitely get you back on. So Wendy was talking about Pilates and meditation. It's very good for trauma. Colette is saying, Colette Kemp says, trust the process, and she's gutted that she missed it. Colette, this will be available in its entirety on YouTube. I will be putting a snippet up. If you go to youtube.com/DJ Andy Ward, stick around and I'll give you some more information. So yeah, we've had people bouncing in and out live with us, leaving messages, saying hello, and I know they're all going to come back and leave some comments for you. So Ian, let me just say again, thank you so much for your time. I hope things get better for your mum. You say things are looking well for her. I'm just going to say a few words to everybody and start wrapping this up. So thank you, my friend. Truly, thank you very much for being so open, so frank, and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed it, Andy, and also like big props to you for what you're doing with. I think this is massive what you're doing. If what you do, I'm not on about me. I'm on about you generally with the topics that you cover touches one person in one way that we begin to start that you begin to promote that change for them to question, because it all starts with that question. It's like massive what you're doing, and I know you're devoted and committed to it, so like well done to you, Andy. Massive.
Thank you very much for saying so. I'll address a few words on that right now. I'm going to press this button. It's going to kick you off. Cheers, man. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take
Lots of
care,
love.
brother.
Bye bye.
Wonderful. Deep, right? Very deep. I enjoyed talking to him. Let me just, he's still got him on there. I pressed loads of buttons and all of my meetings and everything were supposed to finish and they didn't, but he's gone now. Yeah, so Colette was saying, I'm gutted that I missed it. You can find me on YouTube. If you're not aware, Colette, youtube.com/DJ Andy Ward. I've got a wealth of interviews very much along those lines, not as deep as that, but just as interesting. And please do continue to comment on any videos that you see. Sarah says to Ian, who will be checking out the recording, thank you for your honesty. It's a really interesting talk. Michelle has been watching it. Thank you, my love, in the other room. She says, thank you, Ian, for being so open. And Wendy also says, Happy New Year to everyone. And yeah, Wendy is loving the deepness. Ian actually is one of the support members on our 100-day of no alcohol challenge. We began yesterday on New Year's Day, and there's 53 people who are actually gonna be giving up alcohol for 100 days, and Ian is one of 6 support members. So a shout out to all of the crew taking part in that. You can see here on the screen we have another talk which is going to be next Monday at the same time, the birth of UKG in Birmingham, a more light-hearted conversation, but just as deep for some of us as we talk about the emergence of the scene that we all knew and love in the Second City and how we built up the UK garage sound. Spencer, good evening. How are you? He says, thanks for this. As I say, if you only caught the back end of it, then it is available in full. it will be on my YouTube. I will actually delete this video now from the official Inspire and Be Inspired page because I want to drive as much traffic as I can over to my YouTube. If you aren't subscribed, as I say that, it comes up on the screen as if by magic. Please subscribe. And when you subscribe, there's a little bell button. If you click that bell and click all, then you will get an email notification every time we go live, and it'll either alert you to come and join us live and comment, or you can just leave some comments for our guests. Okay, James, again, thank you for staying to the end, my friend. Thank you for your comments, and I will leave it there. Lots of love, lots of respect, and I will see you next Monday. Take care.